on Wednesday. My apologies for the delay. We were just playing hard to get, see if anyone's that interested in watching anymore. But no, we had technical problems. Apologies for that. These things happen. So here I am talking about all things workplace relations and how they are relating to your work, to COVID-19 and the challenges that you're facing. We will do our usual Q&A session today. I'm going to keep banging the same drum, trying to get you to do less worrying, more thinking, trying to ensure that we're all thinking clearly under pressure. And I'm going to use a story of a case that I've been working through with a client of ours overnight to give you an example of that. In the meantime, good news to report is that there is no real news at the moment on JobKeeper or otherwise things that might be impacting you. A couple of, I suppose, peripheral issues. There are a couple of court cases that have started, one involving Qantas relating to issues coming out of stand down. There seems to be one as well that's going to imminently get started down in Victoria. Also relating to stand down, in that case in a private school, whether the school was entitled to a stand down its staff. So what I'm seeing there is the bubbling up of the kind of problems that a few weeks ago we were warning of here and saying don't rush into things like stand down because you could find out that the law is subsequently clarified. You end up with a load of claims from people. So I'm hoping that we've helped in some way to avoid that particular banana skin for businesses. Other than that, not much news coming out overnight and no changes overnight to JobKeeper. But that doesn't change the fact that we're all still battling away with that, and we need to no doubt answer some questions on it. But in terms of the worrying, not thinking, thinking clearly under pressure, again, what I'm recommending that you do is that these sorts of questions that we'll deal with today, the challenging nitty-gritty of JobKeeper and other issues, try and contain them in your mind, in your work day to a period. It might be this hour, and it might be that you speak with relevant people in your business partner, and so on, following this to talk about what you need to be doing in respect of, say, your JobKeeper application. But quite separately from that, I'm really strongly recommending people are sitting down and planning and looking at what JobKeeper means for them over the coming months. So let's assume for a moment that you are eligible for JobKeeper, you've made the application, and all the gremlins and bugs in the system haven't occurred. It's great news. In the next week or so, couple of weeks, you start to see some payments coming through from the government. Fantastic, it's worked. Let's hope that that's the case. What you then really need to be doing is saying, okay, this is roughly how much I'm going to be getting per fortnight. In the case of where you've got employees that are currently stood down and you're just handing over the government subsidy, like a sort of social security, it's probably not really going to actually benefit your business much. But at the same time, what you're going to start to see is some, we hope, loosening of the shutdown, which might in turn enable you to increase your business activity. You maybe stopped your business activity, and it maybe can help you increase back to a certain level. It may be that you're a retail store or a cafe or restaurant, and some of the changes to shutdown that we hope are going to occur might enable you to get back to business. That might mean that you move away from just handing over JobKeeper as a social security into the category of employers who are really getting some or all of their wages paid for them by the government for the next few months. And in that case, you should be looking at that and saying, okay, how much money is that bringing me relative to the revenue that I'm going to be making and any other costs that I've got, like my leases and so on. Where do I predict that I'm going to be in a prepare for the worst but plan for the best scenario at the end of September when this occurs? Because the one thing that I don't think JobKeeper will do, and assuming that we don't have what has been discussed in the media as being a V-shaped recovery, and it's more of a U-shaped recovery, and it takes us longer to get back on track. I don't think it's going to change the fact that if JobKeeper does end in September, as it is currently slated to do, that people are going to be looking at making more permanent cost cuts to their workforce at that time. So certainly here, what we're predicting is that we're very busy at the moment talking to our clients about JobKeeper. We suspect we might see that slow down in the next week or two. But then once it does, as I'm encouraging, we're hoping our clients are starting to plan and start saying, well, you know what, even with JobKeeper, I still have to make these cost reductions. JobKeeper shouldn't be seen as just a sort of sugar hit that makes us forget about the reality of the world. We need to start dealing and planning for any cost reductions that you need in the medium or long term as well. So we'll probably start talking on here, I'd say, about questions like redundancy again, and alternatives to redundancy, what it is that you might do. I had a really interesting one over the last couple of days from a client in the medical profession. There's a number of different surgeries. Is thinking about closing down one of them. What does that mean in terms of redundancy? Do you have to consider employees in all the different surgeries in making it if you close down one, or can you just make those that work for that individual surgery redundant, and so forth? Those sorts of questions are the tricky things that will come out. In the meantime, the story that I said that I'd tell you was one overnight. I'm not going to name this client. I don't think it's fair to do so without permission from the clients. But what it is a classic client for us. It's a small business with 5 staff, and they're working through JobKeeper. Funnily enough, these JobKeeper enabled stand down direction provisions don't really apply because they'd already very proactively managed to get their employees to go on shortened hours, and they'd entered into IFAs with them under their particular enterprise agreement, and that had enabled them to get them down to the hours they want, which happened to be about the $1,500 per fortnight amount. So they got them down from full-time to that level. The government's going to be paying them. They look to be JobKeeper eligible for the $1,500 per fortnight. Fortunately, one of their employees, one of the 5, has terminated the IFA or revoked his agreement to go down to these reduced hours, wants to go on full-time hours again, despite what the business needs and what his colleagues are doing. Not only that, it's sort of ramped up his discourse with the business and is getting a bit rude and feisty. I suspect you've all had situations like this before. I certainly have, and I'm ashamed to admit that, where you're having challenging HR situations internally. And this particular employee has then gone off on sick leave. There's a question then that comes in that what happens during, if you're off on sick leave and you're trying to do a JobKeeper enabled stand down, how do you negotiate that? How do you consult on that? How do you consequently pay the employee if they're signed off sick long term? What do you do about that? And then just to throw an extra thing into the mix, this particular employee then late last night just said, stuff for you guys, I'm going to make a workers' comp claim. What does that mean for the employer? What does that mean for JobKeeper? Do they have to pay JobKeeper while they're waiting to hear if there's really a workers' comp claim? All of these really tricky ins and outs questions, which quite understandably for this client drags them out of thinking and into worrying. And they end up thinking of this 20% of their workforce rather than the 80% that are doing the right thing in order that they can work collaboratively to try and get through this. So that's what we do for a living. That's ultimately exactly the sort of problems that we deal with day to day. But it just reminded me of how many twists and turns there are in JobKeeper. There's not really, well, maybe some of you have had this, but again, presume you wouldn't be watching if it was all that simple. There's not really a world in which you just simply have made a JobKeeper application. Everyone says yes. Government pays your time, no problems. We're all just carrying on as normal. We're not in normal times, and you will end up with individual problems like that. So bear with me a second. I'm just going to grab my pivot story. So I don't want to forget to do the good pivot stories, and I really enjoyed this one actually. I got it yesterday from a company or a childcare centre called Pooh Bear's House, which is in Croydon in Victoria. And Kim there had expressed a frustration that quite a few daycare centres and childcare centres have expressed, which is for all the government's care relief package. What it does is give a number of people free childcare. And actually, funny enough, in her case, what she's got is parents that feel somewhat embarrassed about this sudden flood of free childcare for them, which is actually negatively impacting the centre. And they have been offering to pay, notwithstanding that. Kim's not allowed to accept that payment. They've been offering to make donations. Kim's not allowed to accept those. She's not a charitable organisation. So they've been left in this difficult situation where parents have been wanting to do their bit to help out with Kim's business problem. And I think Kim's shown the sort of selflessness that I think exists in a lot of small businesses. That, in a funny way, I think sometimes we maybe start doing small business thinking that this is going to be a great way to make big sums of money. And then we end up doing it because we're motivated by the mission and passion for what we do. And you realise that the small businesses quite rarely are really effective ways of making big lumps of money. That's not really what we're all doing it for in the end. And Kim certainly isn't. What she's doing it for is being a part of a community, which I think we're going to see more and more now, with people recognising their community and the role they play in it. And she's therefore been asking the parents of the children at her childcare centre to provide any non-perishable donations that they can, that she's then sharing with those that are in less fortunate positions in Croydon and around Croydon. And again, it's another one of those great stories that pivoting doesn't have to equal profit. Pivoting can be it can be enabling your mission and purpose that you're serving within your business. And I think that if you want to look at it as a business, in a business sense, what that helps, of course, is the way your brand is perceived within your community, in order that when you do come out of this, you have a strong brand that people trust and rely upon, as I'm sure they do with Pooh Bear's House. So there's a good pivot story. Please keep those coming through. You can email them to comms@employsure.com.au or to me directly, and we'll give you a shout out here. I think they're just really important for us to keep our mindset on developing and pivoting and making sure we're thinking about the future, not just stuck down in the worrying or thinking phase. So. Some questions, I think, Stewie. I think we've got a decent amount of people watching, notwithstanding the stuff up at the start. So thanks for your patience on that. But let's see if we can reward that patience by answering some questions.
Sure, Ed. Let's kick off this one from Shane. He's a client just looking for some clarity around these critical dates involved. So he's from Core Contracting Group. Do payments for JobKeeper to eligible employees for the month of April need to be paid by tomorrow? I believe this has been extended. Can you please clarify?
It has changed. Thanks for your business, first of all. Yes, so they're now saying the 8th of May you can pay it by. So one of the things that's been a bit confusing for people has been that a lot of people have run a May the 1st payroll or even a May the 3rd payroll, and they were worried about needing to pay for the prior fortnights. And they're not doing it within April, and for that some reason compromising them. Funnily enough, the rules and the laws don't say anything about when you have to pay these April fortnights, but the ATO guidance is now that it's 8th of May. The one thing I'd say on a going forward basis is that there's a bit of a problem with the rules, in that the rules say that you have to pay in the fortnight that you're claiming for. Now, a lot of you, because you're not paying in fortnights that sync up perfectly with the JobKeeper fortnights, it means that if you pay behind, you'll be paying 1 week after the fortnight that you're topping up for JobKeeper, say, for example. So what I've been recommending people that are doing 1st of May, 3rd of May pay runs is that you pay the 2 first JobKeeper fortnights that fall within April, and then actually in this pay run you also top up for the 3rd JobKeeper fortnight, which straddles your pay run. So that could cause some challenges with your cash flow, but that's the best way to be sure that you're paying within the JobKeeper fortnight.
Yep. Sue says, hi Ed, just to clarify, an originally eligible casual employee who turned 18 on the 15th of March is a full-time uni student living out of home in off-site uni accommodation, but who is not financially independent. To clarify, is now ineligible for JobKeeper purely because she is not financially independent?
So she doesn't live at home.
Yep.
So the answer is no one really knows at the moment. That's not being clarified. I would say that person, they work full-time, do they, as well?
Full-time uni, doesn't say.
Okay.
Just a full-time uni student living off-site, not financially independent.
Because they live off-site. I would say that I would, certainly the April fortnights, I would consider them eligible. From what Josh Frydenberg said on Friday, you're allowed to do that. And then let's see what his rules say specifically with a view on the future fortnights.
Okay. This one from Jan, she's a client from We Care 2. It's a not-for-profit. On Monday, I enrolled with the ATO for JobKeeper for our 3 eligible employees and paid their top-up for the first week of April and the full $1,500 for this last fortnight. I had determined through our accounting report that our turnover was down by 26% for April. However, overnight, we've received a sizable donation and it is now only down by 10%, which means we are not eligible for JobKeeper. Question is, will I need to ask our employees to repay the extra wages?
Jan from We Care 2, is it?
Yes.
Thanks for your business, Jan. The answer is it doesn't mean you're not eligible for JobKeeper. When you made your application, you were required to do it based on your projection, which it sounds like you did for April, which was that you were projecting then that you would be 30% down. At the time, it sounded like you were 26 or something percent down, and quite reasonably you ended up the month 30% down. Just because you had this beneficial donation doesn't mean you're suddenly ineligible. What will happen is that you will report on an ongoing basis your April numbers and then your May and so on. And I've seen this question in a few formats, which is I thought that I was eligible. Now maybe my numbers are better than I was worried about. And does that mean I'm automatically ineligible? The answer is you're going to carry on reporting. It seems that you're going to be in until you're out. So you don't need to suddenly stop or recoup payments or anything like that. You should be fine. But you'll do your reporting and you'll see how you go. I'm intrigued as to why you're using 30% as well. You say you're a not-for-profit. Why are you not using 15%? Maybe if you could reply on here to that.
From Michael. We've touched on this before over the weeks, but worth revisiting. Can you claim JobKeeper for apprentices? If so, can you claim both that and the 50% government subsidy?
So we'd be badgering anyone that will listen on this to say the rules and the laws do not say anywhere that you can't have both. All that says that is a couple of websites that seem to change by the day. The ATO no longer says that. The best that we've heard from anyone is it's a policy that you can't. My view is that you should ask for both now, and then let's see if that gets clarified and keep following that mantra of act now and ask for forgiveness rather than waiting and asking for permission.
Yep, this one from Kylie. She says, hi Ed, I was listening to David Koch yesterday and was confused with something he said. He was saying that you may hit the 30% drop in April, not hit it in May, and then hit the 30% drop again in June. He suggested that you should hold on to the JobKeeper payments in case the ATO asks for this money back. I'm confused as I thought we only had to hit the 30% drop once.
My mate Koshi, I prefer to call him. Now we're on nickname terms. I think I may be flattering myself, but that reflects something he and I were discussing on one of his live streams, which is, look, if you're borderline and employ Shaw's in this situation, where we don't know for sure that we will, in fact, we hope that we don't hit that 30% mark. But on a conservative projection, we think it is fair to apply saying, I don't know what's going to happen. You can see in the newspaper today that there's all this talk now about not just suppression, but following what they're trying to do in New Zealand, which is eradication. As I understand it, in my very limited technical knowledge of what goes on with epidemiology and whatever else, is that if they suddenly decide to go for eradication, we could get locked down for quite a lot longer. Or there could be a second wave and we have a second form of lockdown, which could be crippling to this economy. I don't know that. I'm not an economist. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm a business person. I'm therefore planning for the worst, or making sure that my modelling sets that out. And I'm allowed to apply based on that projection. And what David Koch is saying is that, yes, you can apply now. If you find out in reality that you end up not at the 30% level, just be cautious of the money that you've received, because what no one has said at the moment is that, yeah, don't worry about it, mate. If you don't end up being 30%, you can keep it, and it's all fine. There's a real risk, I think a fair risk, that if you don't hit the 30% and your BAS shows that and your reporting shows that you might be asked to pay it back at some stage. So if you're borderline, just when you get it, think of it as something that you may one day have to return, is the message I think he's conveyed there.
Naomi says, I thought it said if we qualify for JobKeeper as a business, then we can use the JobKeeper directions for all employees, not just the ones who sign the nomination form.
I believe it's only those that sign the nomination form, but I'll confirm that and check. Certainly that's my understanding.
Elena says, I would like to know if the employer doesn't qualify for the JobKeeper scheme, do staff still accrue leave when on leave without pay?
So this is a really tricky and technical one. So if your staff have agreed to go on leave without pay, and that may have happened before you apply JobKeeper, then they do not accrue leave during that period. Now, if you use the JobKeeper enabling directions, or you've otherwise stood down your staff members under the Fair Work Act, that's quite different. It might feel like the same thing and look like the same thing, but actually the big difference is that during any form of stand down, a JobKeeper one or otherwise, you accrue leave in the normal way. And that's going to be important in the wash up from this. This is sort of, funny enough, this client I was talking to last night is having exactly that their employee seems to become an expert overnight on the concept of leave accruals and what they're entitled to. And if they go on work cover, they need to get their leave recredited, all of this sort of stuff coming out. You'll find that employees increasingly start to become well versed in the questions that surround stand down, JobKeeper and so on. And start to challenge you on them. Are you doing the right thing? So the Qantas case is a scale example of that, in essence, it's all around the question of sick leave during a stand down. So they're trying to work out whether people accrue, and if they go on sick leave, whether they're entitled to be paid during it.
Jenny has a question around sole traders. Can only one of us, that is a husband and wife, apply for JobKeeper? We have an Airbnb business and I work permanent part-time.
So if you've got an Airbnb business, you're sole traders, you don't, by the sounds of it, employ either one of you through that business. You're wanting to apply as sole traders or company directors, you can only do one of you. Now, if you're permanent part-time elsewhere and you are or aren't working, you may be asked if that business is eligible to nominate there. So it's probably easier to nominate your husband for the sole trader scheme.
This one keeps popping up regularly. This one from Rose. Hi, Ed. Can an employer make an employee take annual leave when the employee gets JobKeeper?
Make is a slight, it sort of amounts to that, but the reality is, Rose, that you can ask them to go on annual leave, subject to them having at least 2 weeks leave balance left, and they can't unreasonably decline that request. Now, what an unreasonable decline of that request is a bit grey, but in essence, it means you can put them on annual leave. You can also do this thing called half pay annual leave, where if someone, say, has got 4 weeks balance, You're not allowed to go into the 2-week balance, but what you can do is give them half pay over the 4 weeks. Now that half pay will, at a minimum, still need to be the 1,500 JobKeeper, but it means that you can extend that period that you might otherwise have them out on leave for.
Another recurring one, this time from Lynn. She says, apologies if you've answered this before, but please, can you confirm if we claim JobKeeper, the casual employee receives $1,500 per fortnight, irrespective of whether they are working or not in each pay period, noting that the casual meets the criteria in order to claim JobKeeper?
That's what Lynn, was it?
That's right, yeah.
That's right, Lynn. They get the 15. So remembering the type of casual, and you say that yours are eligible, so they're meant to have had 12 months of service at the 1st of March 2020 into regular and systematic. Now, the litmus test I've encouraged people to use here on regular and systematic is essentially this. If you give that employee a certain amount of hours per week, and the expectation is that they do them, such that if you stopped giving those hours or the employee stopped accepting them, you'd probably ring each other up and say, what the hell's going on? If that sounds to me like a regular and systematic relationship, which in practice and in the eyes of employment relations specialists means that they're not really casual at all, actually. There's something more permanent about the way they work for you. So in your case, what you're ending up doing is, even though they're not working for you, and normally you wouldn't pay a casual that doesn't work for you, they're sitting at home not doing work, but because they're JobKeeper eligible, you're still giving them the $1,500.
This one from Wayne, he's a client. We're about to bring our regular and systematic casuals back to work for 2 5-hour days per week to do various maintenance and general duties, mostly to get them out of the social isolation, but still maintaining social distancing. Can you explain the options if we find that they refuse to come for these times? Does this alter their regular and systematic classification? And what options would that leave us with?
Great question, Wayne. Thanks to your business as well. So the answer to that is this. So your regular and systematic casuals, you're saying you're going to bring them about 5 hours a week, I think?
Twice. Yep.
Twice. Just twice you're going to bring them in. I'm going to assume that they are, when they're regular and systematic and normally working, they would do more hours than that. What you can't do unless they agree to it is bring people in to do more hours than they were doing either as a part-time, full-time, or regular and systematic casual. You can't force someone to come in and do more than they were otherwise doing for you. But let's assume it's not, it's less. Then what you would do is you would say to them, and technically speaking, what you do is you'd say, okay, in one go, what I'm doing is taking you off stand down or unpaid leave, or what they're on at the moment. I'm then going to do a JobKeeper enabling direction to reduce your hours to these 2 batches of hours, the 2 5-hour periods. Come in. Now, if they say no to that, and they essentially unreasonably refuse that direction, and remember, you've got the power to make that direction subject to consulting them for 3 days and so on, a couple of things might arise. One, you might go down a disciplinary pathway with them, which might be hard if they turn around and say, I'm a casual, I don't have to accept your request. But if they said that, essentially what you'd say is, well, you're not a systematic casual then, because you're not meeting that litmus test of doing the work on expectation, in which case I'll no longer apply for you going forward. So that's the way I deal with that one.
Yeah. This one from Tracy, somewhat related. If a staff member on stand down has declined JobKeeper, as they wish to say on Job Seeker, and when we reopen, are we able to apply for JobKeeper at a later date?
So they're on Job Seeker. When you reopen, you want to apply. You could, if this is your only staff member, remembering also that you may be able to apply for yourselves, either as directors or sole traders for one person. So don't not apply for JobKeeper because that staff member's on Job Seeker. But you can carry on and apply for the business, including any other employees. Now, essentially what you do for that staff member is you'd give them the form. They wouldn't sign it because for whatever reason they want a job seeker. But if they subsequently you open and you actually want them in doing work, then you would be reconvening with them and saying, hey, I actually need you to come in and do work now. It's appropriate that I get you onto JobKeeper. can you please sign this so that I can claim the $1,500 for your income?
This one from Lou. If you have a nominated JobKeeper casual staff member who is unreasonably refusing to work, do you still have to keep paying them? If this person continues to refuse to work, we'll have to hire another employee to cover the hours required.
Yep. Look at the status of them first. If they're permanent, then basically what you're doing is you'd be bringing them back from whatever situation they're on, a bit like Wayne's situation. And if they're refusing to come in and do that, then you've got a disciplinary issue of a permanent employee. If they're a casual staff member and they're refusing to do that, it might be a disciplinary issue, or you might just be saying, well, if you're refusing to do this work, you're not regular and systematic, I should never have nominated you in the first place. And you'd stop nominating them and stop paying them, in my view. It's quite interesting to hear how often this question's coming up. I saw overnight more pretty unhelpful narrative in news blogs and things about employers doing the wrong thing, but it sounds like there's actually quite a swell of people that are at least worried about employees doing the wrong thing and saying, oh, I don't want to come back to work. I'd assume that by this stage everyone will be so sick and tired of being home that it'll be craving getting back to work, but maybe we've all become a bit lazy in the interim. So I'll be interested to hear if these are real examples in due course. If you could let me know, I'd love to hear if you've got specific cases of people saying no.
This one from Alison. If an employee says they have contacted the ATO who told them they would be eligible for JobKeeper, should the business accept that and therefore nominate them?
So if the business is otherwise chosen to do JobKeeper, you don't have to do JobKeeper, remember, it's your choice to do it. And there's a bit of narrative from the government, sort of almost quasi-pressure saying, well, why wouldn't you? There's a lot of business reasons why you wouldn't do it, and you might choose not to. Now, if you are doing it anyway and the employee says that they've got confirmation that they're eligible, my presumption is that they're in some grey area, probably because they're casual, as to whether they're regular and systematic. The ATO is not the definitive judge of regular and systematic. They're basically asking you to judge that. So you, as the employer, will determine that. Okay. This one for you, Stu. Who's Andrew Denton?
This is not Andrew Denton.
This is Stu, Andrew Denton. So no, he's not. He's really called Stu. I'm showing my naivety. I need to go and work out who Andrew Denton is. But,
he's a top flight Australian interviewer.
Okay, there we go. There we go. I need to watch more telly. Yeah, no, it's not, but he is good at it. You're right. So he could be Andrew. Watch out, Andrew Denton.
True. I guarantee, Andrew. Thank you. From Leanne, we have a staff member who has been on unpaid leave since mid-March. They've recently recovered from a cancer treatment and are 7 months pregnant, due to start maternity leave on the 1st of May. I paid her JobKeeper. Is it her responsibility to not claim paid parental leave benefit, and can it come back on me?
So it's her responsibility to tell you if she's on paid parental leave benefit, and up to her as to whether she's going to apply for that or not, is eligible for that, and so on. So what she shouldn't be doing is get both. And if she's not getting that, should be having an open conversation with her. Then you need to nominate her. But I don't see how that could come back on you.
This one from Thea. Can you please clarify the calculation for the alternative test with regards to growth companies, specifically the 12.5 increase for the last 3 months? That is, if April is my test month, if I'm able to prove a 12.5 increase in turnover between December 19 and March 20, does this mean I meet that test?
Sounds like it is on top of it to me. So yeah, it's if you've got to look at that, the 3 month, 6 month or 12 month period, which is the right period for you to look at, depending on the way your business has grown, but also how long you've been in business. And you'd look at the average over that period to see whether there's been that growth, and therefore apply it. But it sounds like you're on top of it here. So you'd look at that 3 month period for the 12.5%.
Right. And this is one that pops up every week too, Ed, this time from Jordana. Is there any clarification or rulings on how to handle commission-only employees with regard to JobKeeper payments in the real estate sector, and also debit credit employees in the real estate sector?
Julian, interesting actually. I was just chatting to the head of Reef by email overnight, who I got to meet through a webinar, and we were both debating this, but we're both of the view, and we've been advising our real estate clients of this, that you can certainly claim in debit situations, but also commission only. The key to it is whether they get $1,500 in the fortnight. If they don't, then you're going to have to top them up. And if they're getting more than that, then you'll get the $1,500 as a subsidy from the government, basically. So we both agree that this is a system that's designed to help people carry on employing people. No one seems to have expressly dealt with this reality in the real estate industry through the legislation. So we're all proceeding on the basis that you can use JobKeeper.
Quick one from Adele. Does a sole trader with 0 employees have to pay JobKeeper to themselves?
Sole trader with 0 employees, do they have to pay JobKeeper to themselves? They don't have to apply, but if you're eligible and seen the downturn, I don't know why you wouldn't, and you would get the $1,500 for yourself per fortnight. You don't, on the rules, have to show that you've already paid yourself $1,500 to reclaim it.
A quick one from Peter as well. An employee is looking after an older relative and now refuses to work but wants to receive JobKeeper. Can I make her redundant?
So repeat that one for me, Stu, if you
Sure. Peter says, I've got an employee who is looking after an older relative and now refuses to work, but they want JobKeeper. Can I now make her redundant?
So there's a bit of choice around that. They're basically saying to you, if you translate it, they're saying, can I have leave without pay? And try and get the conversation in this pathway before it turns into a dispute. They're basically saying, look, for my personal reasons, I don't want to come into work. You're quite rightfully saying, well, those are not entirely my problem. I have business I need to conduct, and you're an employee with, and we've got some mutual obligations. But they're saying, can I have leave without pay? And you can either answer that and say yes, but if you do and that person's otherwise eligible, you'd still need to pay them the $1,500 top up, which could be a cash flow burden on you. Or you'd answer it and say, no, I'm sorry. And if the employee refuses, then you'd escalate that through to a management issue, a disciplinary issue, essentially. So you're going to have to work out how tough a line you're going to take, basically.
Kate with a question around casual employees and the criteria. I just wanted to confirm, says Kate, if a casual employee did not work for a 6-week period during the past 12 months from 1st of March 2019, do they still qualify?
So if they're regular and systematic and they had some time off for whatever personal reasons they might have chosen to, maybe just leave, bearing in mind that that casual employee probably doesn't have paid leave, then yes, they should be casual if they've done overall, they should be eligible if they've done overall over 12 months.
Okay. Andrew asks, can you use JobKeeper to pay redundancy/notice payments in the lead up to September 27th if the position is not required by the business at the end of JobKeeper?
So you can use JobKeeper to, let's look at this, break this down a little bit. So if you're paying your staff or some of them to do work and you're paying them wages, you're going to receive JobKeeper back to you after the event. So really it's just a cash injection to your business that you're getting back to cover off wages that you've already paid. Now what you do with those funds, ultimately up to you because you've got them after the event. But if you're saying that someone is otherwise on unpaid leave and all you're doing is transferring cash from the government to that employee, that $1,500 a fortnight, if you then go through a redundancy process, what I don't believe you could do is use it to pay out redundancy pay in that situation. What you could do is if you have to give that employee notice as part of that redundancy process, that is essentially wages during that period, and you might use it to pay those wages, any notice period wages, essentially. So there's no handcuffs in the JobKeeper payment which says that you can't make people redundant.
This one from Tamara, it's got a few followers too. If we want to terminate an employee that has been a casual for 2 years but has only done 5 to 8 hours per week, can we terminate her, or do we need to keep her on and pay JobKeeper? She's 17.
She's done quite a while for a 17-year-old, 5 years.
2 years.
2 years, sorry, but only about 5 hours a week. Yeah. Can we terminate? Yes, there's no obligation to keep people on just because you're doing JobKeeper.